Number 10, one less eye. That's right, kicking off the list at number 10, we have a Spider-Man moment that gives me goosebumps every time I see it. We start now with Spider-Man, the Other, Evolve or Die, where we see Spider-Man get his eye ripped out. Yeah, Morlun put Spider-Man through quite the battle, but ultimately it ended with his eye being a midnight snack. Spider-Man even compared being hit by Morlun to being hit by the Incredible Hulk, saying how he's never been hit so hard in his life. He has no idea it's about to get so much worse. Kicking off the list at number 10, left arm issues. Since Iron Man 1, Tony's left arm hasn't gotten a break. When Tony makes his first flight escaping the 10 rings, a tank shoots him out of the sky, hitting his left arm. In Iron Man 2, he gets electrocuted by whiplash and his text shows that his left arm is in the red. It's not looking good. Iron Man 3, Tony uses snow to soothe his arm after crash landing, so it must be still hurting. In Civil War, Tony literally says to Nat, "My left arm is numb, is that normal?" Cut to an hour later, Tony's arm is even in more pain and now in a sling after Wanda dropped a car on it. Even in Spider-Man Homecoming, he's supporting his arm whilst giving Peter a lecture on being a superhero. Makes sense why he snapped with his right hand. Left one's probably done. He probably has no nerves left.
Number 10, her original costume. Black Widow's original costume before her black catsuit, but after her more casual spy in a dress look, was definitely not worthy of Natasha's fearsome presence. Originally in the comics, Black Widow was a villain, and this outfit made her look kind of like a C-class one at best. The one-piece bodysuit and mask I don't mind as much, though a small bodysuit does seem kind of impractical for a human who spies and likely doesn't want to expose skin to getting nicked or hurt or shot at. Still, the worst part of the look by far was the full body fishnet that she wore underneath. Obviously fishnet doesn't cover very much and it just looks gaudy, and that seems like something that would catch your eye as well, as opposed to lending to stealth. Add in her cape and her B earrings and W cape clasp and you've got one eyesore of a look. Thankfully, Black Widow would concede that she needed something way more durable and would move from this look to her more signature all black ensemble. Number 9, Hawkeye kills her. Really, just the Ultimate Universe has been pretty awful to Black Widow, but one of the worst moments for her here is when she is killed point blank by Hawkeye. Granted, at least she kinda deserved her death here, but did Black Widow deserve such a dark story in general? Probably not. Clint comes for revenge because here Natasha is a traitor who basically was responsible for the death of his family and his own capture besides. Escaping capture, he gets free and rushes to where Black Widow is being held as Tony already apprehended her. He then basically executes her while she is in custody at the hospital. It's all pretty dark and very much Ultimate Universe-esque, and not necessarily in the good way.
Kicking off the list at number 10, smacked by Thanos. We got to see Captain America and many others get the beatdown of their lives in Avengers Infinity War, but in the comic, in Infinity Gauntlet, it was somehow even more brutal. Yet in part 4 of Jim Starlin's The Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos at one point weakens himself while maintaining the stones because he wanted to take on the Avengers in a more equal fight. All of this just to impress Death. So he makes himself weak and then fistfights them. It's crazy. So Captain America is leading the Avengers into battle, and at this point, everybody is getting hit. Cyclops gets his head stuck in a clear block of force, Vision gets his insides just torn out, and then Thanos sees Cap as having such an emotional outburst, and then after Thanos destroys Cap's shield, he gives him the mighty backhand of a lifetime, knocking him out cold. Number 9, Man Spider. We've all wished at some point or another that we could have Spider-Man's powers. I mean, the wall crawling alone I would take. So useful. But what if you got more than you bargained for power-wise? Well, in Spider-Man Disassembled, we see this in a pretty gross way. Peter starts to become an actual spider, starting with growing an extra set of peepers. Yeah, so that's disgusting. But wait, there's more. He ends up becoming an actual spider. Yeah, so after being injected with this goop from the Spider Queen, not only does he grow some extra eyes, but he also gives birth to another Peter Parker. Yeah, you heard me correctly. So out comes Peter, and he's the same Peter Parker as before, but a little stronger, with maybe a hint of PTSD sprinkled in there. But that's not particularly new to Peter. Bonus points to Peter also for attending a wedding with the 2 extra eyes and not being noticed. Gotta love Star Trek themed weddings. Get away with everything. Number 9, he lost Bucky. Okay, 2005 was a wild time. We got to see Jason Todd return as the Red Hood, and Marvel had their own type of super sleeper assassin come back from the dead as well, Bucky Barnes. In 2005, Bucky Barnes returned, but of course he was never the same. Near the end of World War II, Bucky and Cap were trying to disarm a bomb on a plane while taking down Baron Zemo. The bomb went off, hurling Steve and Bucky into the freezing waters, and well, as for Cap, he came out of this pretty good. He remained frozen, just hanging out, and Bucky, he didn't end up so lucky. His body fell into the freezing waters, and at the time, a Soviet spy submarine was in the area crossing the English Channel. So they scooped him up, fixed the whole left arm situation, brainwashed him, and turned him into this brutal assassin. It's heartbreaking. See, he has all these incredible abilities that make him a fierce warrior, but he doesn't remember how he got them, making him this deadly assassin and a super crazy villain to handle. This is Steve's right-hand man. Every conflict that they go through is just painful. One of the biggest turning points of Marvel was the introduction of the Winter Soldier. This was a conflict that came to life on the big screen back in 2014 with the Winter Soldier, and we're kind of still seeing Bucky try and figure this life out. With the Falcon and the Winter Soldier coming next month on Disney Plus, we can see even more of what he has to go through post-Winter Soldier times. Number 8, Hail Hydra. This next one resulted in writer Nick Spencer getting death threats. That's right, so fans were mostly not okay with this one. Back in 2016, Captain America said 2 words that would throw every comic book fan for a loop: Hail Hydra. It all went down in 2017's Secret Wars, when Captain America's reality had been rewritten secretly by Kobik, who was a sentient cosmic cube acting under the influence of the Red Skull. So as a child, Steve was recruited and raised to believe in their ideology, which was the strong ruling for the weak, for the good of all. Now there's a pleasant nod to this in Avengers Endgame, of course, when the team goes back in time to the first Avengers plot. We see Steve get in the elevator to try and get the scepter, and then we see the whole Hydra/Shield elevator stocked full of guys. Now we don't know this at the time, but that's fully Hydra. But Steve knows this. So instead of beating everybody up and kicking ass in the elevator like he did in Winter Soldier, he just said, "Hail Hydra." And then just like that, he walked out of the elevator with a smirk on his face. It was beautiful. Number 8, Venom. Making its debut in Amazing Spider-Man 299. Next up on the list, we have the introduction of Venom. Venom is a symbiote from the Clintar race, and after making its way to Earth, it eventually wound up in the hands of course, Spider-Man. So this dark symbiote started to make Spider-Man's life better. I mean, he got a cool haircut, started standing up for himself, and the suit made him stronger. It just felt better. But this didn't last too long because the symbiote found its ideal host shortly after Peter ripped it off, and that being Edward Brock. Eddie had visited Our Lady of Saints Church to beg God for forgiveness before ending his own life. And then this alien symbiote bonded with him mentally and physically. Like I said, at this time, Peter was there trying to get rid of the symbiote because it was doing more bad than good in his life. Now, because it had originally bonded with Spider-Man, he basically is another Spider-Man, kind of. He gets the same powers Spidey used and also some of the same memories. It's actually why Eddie Brock knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Fun little fact. This ended up creating one of Spider-Man's best villains, and we get to see Tom Hardy reprise the role of Venom in the not so near future.
Number 7, being controlled. The smallest spoilers ahead for WandaVision if you know nothing about it, but mostly this part is pretty safe as we'll just be focusing kind of on the premise of the show and what we know of it so far based on what has been implied in the episodes. So it's more of like a, if you know the show, you probably know this. In WandaVision, it's implied that Scarlet Witch, Wanda herself, is in complete control of everything going on in Westview, including Vision's appearance and existence there. After all, as we talked about before, Vision's appearance there likely means that Wanda manipulated him and brought him back to life, possibly even reanimating his lifeless corpse. Yikes. As the show unfolds, Vision becomes more suspicious of his life in Westview and Wanda and her involvement not just in it, but in manipulating it as well with her reality-altering powers. Also, I never noticed this before, but Westview's name actually seems to be a reference to the initial of the main characters of the show and the show title itself. Westview, WV. WandaVision, WV. Interesting. Also, it's weird that it took me so long to notice that, but I just noticed it today, so I was looking for all kinds of other explanations as to what Westview meant. I never thought about, like, the initials.
And number 6, the affair. Gwen and Norman's affair, to be specific. This is an absolute nightmare of an issue, so of course we're throwing it in here. We go now to Sins Past, which was this 5-part story that revealed that Gwen Stacy had actually had an affair with Norman Osborn. And they had kids named Gabriel and Sarah. So he meets them in a pretty wild way. We're introduced to these two twin characters, these new mysterious characters, and one of them really resembles Gwen Stacy, like by a lot. So Spider-Man 509, this begins, and it starts with a letter from a dead Gwen Stacy. So Peter starts to analyze the situation and the letter, and eventually finds out the secret that even Mary Jane knew about. So 7 months before Gwen's death, she gave birth to these twins with Norman. But because of Norman's blood, they aged a lot faster. And this wasn't taken too well by comic book fans, as this was written out pretty fast. Still an awful time for Peter, I'd say. I mean, even Mary Jane knew about it the whole time. So many secrets, so little time.
Number 5, having Magneto for a father. At least for the time she did. While in the comics, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are no longer considered the children of Magneto, they still had him as a father for many years, and across many alternate Earths as well. While Magneto might be good with magnetizing, he is not very good at parenting. Magneto is usually a pretty strict father who has demanded much from his children over the years. I think Wanda, in terms of having a caring parent, was actually better off with her sentient cow mom that the High Evolutionary created.
And number 4, parents are back? Yeah, this one's pretty neat. So right off the cover of this, we see the text, "The most cataclysmic events of Spider-Man's life begins in this issue." And that's probably enough to pull you into the issue. I mean, come on. So we find out that Peter's parents have returned from the dead. So in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 365, we meet them again. Peter comes home and Aunt May's like, hey, I'm here with our new guests. And Peter's like, oh, new guests, those are always fun. Are those my parents? Yes, Peter's parents had returned from the dead. Well, rather, they had never died to begin with. Let me explain. So they went on to explain how they were alive and working for Red Skull in secret for years. Only it was later revealed that they were evil androids the whole time. So his robo-parents were actually collecting some intel about Peter to give back to Chameleon. Chameleon created these fake parents for Green Goblin. So many lies. Just a web of lies. Spider-Man web of lies. Now we get it.
Number 3, infected with a HYDRA virus. During the events of Secret Empire, Steve Rogers would end up having his whole life history rewritten and be revealed as a long-time sleeper agent for HYDRA. Our heroes would, however, find out too late about Rogers' true allegiances, and so Captain America would become Captain Hydra, or Hydra Supreme, and would take over the United States of America for the glory of Hydra. But he would also end up recruiting some of Earth's mightiest heroes besides, including Scarlet Witch and Vision. But how did he convince them to join the side of evil? Well, he didn't. For Wanda, Hydra actually awoke CHTHON within her in order to take control of her body and make use of her powers. And if you want to learn more about CHTHON and that whole thing, you can check out the worst things that happened to Wanda's list, where we talk about that a bit more. For Vision, being a synthezoid, they merely infected him with a virus. That was easy. And although Vision tried to fight it, he remained unable to break free and fight against Hydra until near the end of the event. Like the second last issue, I believe, in the main one. Secret Empire number 9.
And number 2, identity not so secret. If you stuck around until the very end of Spider-Man Far From Home, you were treated to a pretty sweet teaser. So of course we see J.K. Simmons reprise his role of J. Jonah Jameson in what starts out as a pretty comical scene. Now of course we're happy to see him back in this Spider-Man universe, but he comes bearing bad news. He ends up showing leaked footage from the final battle with Mysterio, and in the footage we see him shout out Spider-Man by his secret identity, Peter Parker, and a nice little photo to go along with it too. Now this isn't the first time this has happened. Back in the comics before the Civil War storyline, Peter takes a page out of Tony's book and reveals his secret identity to the world. And after that, things go south quite fast, including a hired gun setting his aim on Aunt May. And finally, number 1, you guessed it, Uncle Ben's death. Of course we have to include this in the list and save it for last. We had to sit through this in theaters like numerous times. And that's for good reason. One of the biggest moments of Peter Parker's life was when his Uncle Ben died. Now, after letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his uncle's life. So not only did Peter, of course, feel saddened by this very close loss, especially not having parents to begin with, but he was responsible for letting this guy get away. He honestly let it happen, and then in Amazing Fantasy issue 15, we see it all unfold. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds with, "Sorry pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1, and that means me." And And cut to bam.
Number 10, being named traitor. As awful as this one is, it ranks a little lower on our list because, well, Wanda kind of deserved this one. After the events of House of M, Wanda was seen as one of the biggest mutant traitors around, still being believed at this point to be a mutant. Oddly enough, Scarlet Witch was one of the few prominent mutants in comics who has never been part of the X-Men team, and was really only an Avenger. If you're wondering why that is, a big part of it in the later years has to do with mutants hating her due to the fact that she basically wiped them from existence with her wish of no more mutants, which we now refer to as decimation. Well, that, and she was initially too busy serving on her father's villainous team of mutants, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Still, although she did earn the title traitor, much of what has happened as a result of House of M happened because of basically how harshly people were treating Wanda. So, although she earned the title traitor, it still feels a little harsh to say that she entirely deserved it. I've always thought of Wanda as more of a misguided villain when she plays that role, as opposed to a true and sincere villain in the comics. Number 9. Cast as a villain. To expand on our previous point a bit more, a few of the worst things that have happened to Scarlet Witch usually involve her being cast in some kind of villainous role, despite the fact that she is truly a hero when it all comes down to it. Scarlet Witch only ever wants to do what's best, and usually it's some kind of outward manipulation or force that turns her momentarily evil, or causes her to break down and commit some kind of heinous action. It does make for some pretty interesting stories, but it's pretty awful the number of times and how severely Scarlet Witch has been used in this way by others, and when it comes to storytelling. Number 8, betrayed by her fiance. Remember when Wanda was about to marry Dr. Doom, and then it was implied that he really only wanted to be with her because he wanted to take her power from her? Granted, it seemed like he also wanted to do so to help her and help the world, but of course, it's still Doom, so you can bet that ego and selfishness were a big part of the reasoning behind this plot as well. Scarlet Witch no longer remembered who she was when her reincarnated son and member of the Young Avengers, Wiccan, came to find her. All she knew was that she loved Victor Von Doom and was ready to marry him, despite the fact that he had kind of manipulated her. Her love was real, but the backstory that she believed she belonged to wasn't. Wanda ended up spurned and mistreated by Doom even after the truth came out, and she still tried to help him. And before we move on to this next point, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you are enjoying it. It really does help us out, I promise.
Number 7, Tony Stark's death. With rumors swirling around about the next Spider-Man movie being one within the multiverse, it's only fair to go back and look at some of the sad themes of Spider-Man Far From Home, with of course being the death of Tony Stark. So right off the bat, we see Peter struggling with the weight of the world, having everybody look at him as the new leading Avenger. With most of our other Avengers off-world, Spider-Man facing Mysterio couldn't have been more grueling. This poor kid even gets slammed by a train at one point. It's easy to say this is a time where Peter could for sure go without. Reconnecting with lost friends, dealing with much older classmates like bad boy Brad, who doesn't make the first year back in school easy for Peter at all. That plus Tony Stark's inventory just being handed off to him, that's a lot of responsibility. The kid's going through a lot of pressure, and puberty too. I mean, probably. What a combo.
Number 6, death of her family. Even in the MCU, Wanda has a tragic origin story. In the cinematic universe, she and her brother Pietro were orphaned at a young age after they managed to survive an attack that collapsed their apartment. Their parents were killed in the explosion that decimated their home, but they survived after a second missile landed, but did not explode. However, this experience would go on to haunt them for the rest of their days, with the name on the missile being burned into their memories for years to come. And that name, of course, was Stark, which is why when we first meet the Maximoff twins in Age of Ultron, they are enemies and not allies of the Avengers. Number 5, no one to help! This point has some more specific spoilers for the latest episode of WandaVision, episode 6. So if you haven't gotten there yet, you maybe want to skip this one if you want to avoid spoilers, or if you haven't seen it but you're like, I'm living through the spoilers, man, which is fine. In the latest episode of WandaVision, it's Halloween in Westview as we proceed along our sitcom timeline into the world of basically kind of a Malcolm in the Middle inspired era, which aired actually in the 2000s, despite this episode having a very 90s feel, and despite that series having a 90s feel. Trying to solve the mystery of what's really going on in Westview, Vision lies to Wanda about not being able to join her and the kids trick-or-treating, due to being on duty for Neighborhood Watch. Now, in reality, he actually spends the evening investigating Westview and eventually finds the town's reality warping barrier, which he attempts to cross, not knowing that this will likely end up killing him. as outside of this altered reality, which it's hinted at is numbered as 2800 in the MCU, despite the fact that I think that number's already taken in the comics, Vision is in fact dead. When he moves to leave the town, we watch as he struggles against the magical barrier, which obviously very much wants to keep him within town limits. Sword watches as he attempts to move into their world, seeing him fall to pieces, slowly dissolving in front of them. And as a handcuffed Darcy Lewis shouts for them to do something, like help this man. But that doesn't end up happening. They just run. In the end, it's up to Wanda to save the day when Billy alerts her that he senses that his dad is in danger. Wiccan to the rescue. Number 4, spell backfire. Even when Wanda tries to do good, she can't catch a break. In the X-Men Empire series tie-in, Scarlet Witch seeks to right her wrongs by bringing back all those mutants lost in the massacre at Genosha. She is trying to atone for her past and all the harm that she has brought to mutant kind. But poor Wanda can't seem to catch a break. Her ritual to revive the dead backfires and instead simply turns those that she's trying to bring back into zombie mutants, instead of bringing them, fully back to life. To make matters worse, we later find out that Doctor Strange warned her against trying to make amends for her sins this way, telling her she couldn't do what had already been done. This made Wanda think that she simply needed to shift her focus instead of realizing that she needed to actually forge new paths as opposed to undoing old tragedies.
And number 3. Gwen Stacy's death. This one left average moviegoers stunned in theaters when The Amazing Spider-Man 2 hit the big screen. We finally see the death of Gwen Stacy, and it's beautiful. So of course this comes from the comics, specifically in issue 121 of The Amazing Spider-Man. The Green Goblin ends up dropping her off the Brooklyn Bridge, and although Peter has his trusty webs, sometimes the angle just doesn't quite work out, and Gwen's neck ended up snapping from the momentum. So this happened in the movie as well, and Eagle Eye fans could spot the clock tower in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 striking 12:10, which references issue 121. And the way the web shot out like a hand too, I mean, really? Right in the heart. This scene's amazing. I mean, of course it's really sad, but the music, the way it's shot, really drives this part home. I mean, it's sad that this scene was one of the last ones we got from Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man run. Sure, the movies weren't as good as the new installments, but it would have been nice to see where this Spider-Man went after this dark moment. Would have been pretty dark. We'll never know. I mean, maybe multiverse stuff. We'll see.
Number 2, possessed by CHTHON. This is one of those times that Wanda was made a villain truly without any of her own intent steering her there. Wanda was actually marked by CHTHON at birth to act as the Elder God's vessel, should he find a way to return. CHTHON would actually succeed in possessing Wanda and using her to return on more than one occasion, though the first time around was probably the worst, when Mordred summoned CHTHON via a ritual, allowing the god to basically take hold of Wanda and leaving the Avengers powerless against his will. Fortunately, the disaster that would be CHTHON's return was averted before the ritual could be fully completed. Thank goodness for dolls with parts of Wanda's soul in them. That's what happened. Number 1, losing her children. If you were to ask Wanda what one of the worst things that ever happened to her was, I'm sure she would likely answer the loss of her children. Although she would get her 2 twin boys, Billy and Tommy, back when their souls were basically reborn into our world, reincarnating them, she would never really get back the family that she had initially willed into existence. Using her power and from her desire, Wanda made it possible for her and Vision to have children together, and Wanda gave birth to 2 twin boys. However, when others learned that they weren't real and that their existence was kind of making reality unstable, they forced Scarlet Witch to confront the truth, temporarily destroying or displacing her children, since they weren't really fully destroyed because they kind of did come back, but just in a really weird comic book way. Number 10, Stan Lee's ire. Initially, Vision wasn't loved by all at Marvel's offices. In fact, Marvel legend Stan Lee hated the look and the name of the character apparently when he was first created in 1968 by John Buscema and Roy Thomas. Apparently, Stan complained to Roy about the choice of color for the android, not liking the look of his bright red appearance, and also felt the name was not a good fit, not strong enough for the character. Today, his appearance has become iconic, and we think nothing of it. But back when he was first created, it wasn't just with comic book characters that his existence was considered controversial. Number 9, death of his first creator. Despite the fact that we often attribute Vision's existence to Ultron, he wasn't the only one involved in his creation process. And no, I'm not talking about Tony Stark here. Professor Phineas Horton was forcefully recruited by Ultron into helping him create the synthezoid we later came to know as the Vision. Vision, in fact, was originally given the memories of Professor Horton's previous android creation, which brought on the rage of Ultron, who had specifically told Horton to wipe those memories. He's like, you do it or you're dead. And Horton was like, we'll see. Ultron, of course, did kill the professor, though, creating probably one of the first tragic moments in Vision's life to come about. At the time, the synthezoid mourned the life of his creator and swore to get revenge on Ultron. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick reminder, if you are enjoying this video and you want more like it, talking about Wanda or Vision or both of them together, oh, romantic moments, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. It really does help us out on the channel. Number 8, no sense of normalcy. Despite the fact that he might seem cold and seems to embrace his synthetic nature, Vision actually constantly strives to fit in. When Wanda and Vision first got married in the comics, they both sought to find normalcy together by settling down in a suburban neighborhood. Oh, it's so nice. Similar to what we've seen the couple attempt in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the Disney Plus show WandaVision. Yeah, if you like WandaVision and you want to sort of read more things that maybe have inspired it, this is a miniseries you're going to want to read. The two of them, however, it seems were never fated to have a normal life, and try as they might, strange events always seemed to disrupt their attempts and lurk around every single corner. For an example of what I'm talking about, you need not look further than the first issue of their miniseries together from the 80s, The Vision and Scarlet Witch. Seriously though, check out this miniseries. On Halloween, a quiet night in quickly turns into something out of a nightmare, ending with a visit from Scarlet Witch's often villainous then-father, Magneto. So it becomes more of a nightmare, I imagine. Number 7, being named Pretender. What could be worse than being referred to as a traitor? Well, how about when Scarlet Witch was referred to as an imposter? This was the new label she was given after it was revealed that she was not actually a mutant, but had been led to believe that she was one for most of her life, due to the High Evolutionary disguising her and her twin brother as both mutants after experimenting on them, and apparently giving them powers himself. During the Dawn of X relaunch in an issue of X-Men, we actually see stories being told of Scarlet Witch where young mutants are taught to refer to her as a pretender, someone who posed as a mutant but was not one and could not be trusted. Seems a little unfair considering that Wanda herself did not know her true origin until much later in life. She wasn't lying, she had been manipulated into believing she was truly a mutant and Magneto's daughter. Number 6, from the Torch to Wonder Man. The first Human Torch was not actually Johnny Storm, but was an android created by Professor Phineas Horton himself. Ultron, wanting to make his own such creation, kidnapped the professor and forced him to build an android being for Ultron's own purposes, which we talked about a little bit earlier. The professor, of course, modeled the synthezoid after his own creation, but a little too closely for Ultron's liking, as I said, bestowing the Human Torch's memories as well to the creation we'd later come to know as Vision. Brought to life, this being attacked Ultron, who had killed the professor as punishment for his betrayal. Unfortunately, Torch Vision, this version of Vision, was no match for Ultron, and in the end he actually ended up being reprogrammed by Ultron to follow his orders and was given the brain patterns of Wonder Man. Nothing against Wonder Man, by the way, but sharing brain patterns with that hero would cause lots of weirdness for Vision and for Scarlet Witch as well later on down the line. I feel like if you get to pick who you want to share brain patterns with, Wonder Man's not at the top of the list. Also, it's really weird that like Wonder Man's brain patterns were just lying around Hank Pym's lab in like a little recorder device. Like, why did you have those, Hank Pym? What's going on?
Number 5, Doc Swap. This is a body swapping story that might make you pretty uncomfortable. So we go now to the Amazing Spider-Man 700, where we find a dying Dr. Otto Octavius. So Octavius switches bodies with Spider-Man, so that Spider-Man would die in his body and then he would live on inside the body of a superhero and do some good. Not a bad plan. Now the best part of this is that Peter was still inside, a little bit. He was able to remain inside the body and could communicate, only communicate, with the new webhead, Otto Octavius. It's like your subconscious just talking to you the whole time. It was pretty neat to see this version of Spider-Man as well, and after a few minutes with the new, younger, healthier body, donned himself the new name, the Superior Spider-Man.
Number 4, manipulated into being a villain. I really do feel for Vision. Most of the most terrible things that have happened to him in the comics or otherwise are honestly my worst nightmare, which is being controlled by other people. In this case, we're talking about when he was sent in to kill the Avengers and seemingly in some kind of murderous trance Once the team attempted to reason with him, it became apparent that this synthozoid enemy wasn't all he appeared to be, and in fact that he might not truly be acting of his own volition. In the end, Vision would end up becoming an ally to the Avengers, fighting against his instincts to do them harm. They'd actually help him by deprogramming his murderous urges, and he would eventually go on to join the Avengers outright, fighting many times against his creator and father, Ultron. Many times. Many times. Ultron never stays dead. Number 3, Vision's death. Going back to the MCU for a moment, one of the worst things that happened to Elizabeth Olsen's Scarlet Witch was the death of Ultron in Infinity War. Wanda had to kill her synthezoid lover herself after Thanos showed up to attack Wakanda during an attempted procedure to safely remove the Mind Stone from Vision, attempted by Black Panther's brilliant sister, the Princess Shuri. As the procedure was cut short and everyone was pulled into the fray, Thanos was on his way to claim that stone when Viz asked Wanda to destroy it, and by extension destroy him. She initially refused, but reluctantly agreed when Viz pressed her and insisted that she wouldn't and couldn't hurt him with her powers, and that all he felt when she used them on him was her. No pain, just her. Aw, so cute. Through tears, Scarlet Witch used her powers to destroy the stone, only to watch Thanos show up and use the Time Stone to rewind time, bring Vision back to life, so that he could destroy him by ripping the Mind Stone out of his head very painfully. Yikes. Number 2, death. While those who only knew Vision from the MCU might think of his tear-jerking demise in Endgame, comic fans know that a fate worse than being destroyed, at least the first time around, awaited him in the comics. Here, instead of Wanda destroying him at his own request, urging her on with words of affirmation and love, Vision ends up being controlled against his will by her, which leads to him ending up in a direct conflict that he doesn't actually want any part of, which ultimately leads to his very gruesome death. Not only does he melt and vomit up silver pods, which transform into Ultron bots, but overkill comes into play when She-Hulk then decides to go into a rage and ends up tearing him down the middle, which is a pretty epic and permanent kind of on-panel death. Although, of course, even if you get ripped down the middle, that's probably not the end of you, because comics. Vision is still a synthetic being, and he can be recreated. So don't worry, he would be rebuilt, and he would return once more. But what a death to come back from. Number 1, weaponized. During the events of Avengers Disassembled, which led right into House of M, Wanda ended up suffering from a mental break, and as such ended up turning on her fellow Avengers. You'd think Vision, being one of the Avengers who, is married to Wanda, would be safe, but no. Wanda ended up not only getting him killed, but it was the way in which she did it, I think, that just really cut him deep. She didn't just put him in the right places to be torn apart by She-Hulk, but she actually turned him into a weapon to be used against his friends and teammates, the Avengers. Vision actually warned them when he came to them that he was no longer in control of his body before vomiting up those pods, which turned into Ultron robot drones, who then attacked the Avengers after their mansion had already been attacked. This was just a real bad day all around for the whole team. When Vision returned to life and Wanda much later came to ask for forgiveness, it would actually be this memory that would prevent him from being able to forgive his wife, Scarlet Witch. He was like, I can forgive the fact that you had a mental break, but you literally turned me against my friends and made me hurt them, and some of them died.
Number 7, Old Man Cap. At the end of Avengers Endgame, now that we're talking about it, we see Captain America return the Infinity Stones, only he doesn't shoot back to the present day after he's done. No, he sticks around, hangs out with Peggy, dances the night away, and then we see him as an old man giving the shield down to Sam Wilson just minutes later. It's a lovely end to Chris Evans' run on the character. You got a lot of feels. But in the comics, we also saw an old Captain America, but this time, it wasn't on his terms. The Iron Nail sucked all of Cap's serum out, leaving him not ripped, but also not young as well. So now Steve looked 90, and there's no way you're gonna fight at that age, let alone pick up a shield. So he would lead the Avengers and call out orders from the radio. It sounds like a pretty sweet job for us, but for Steve, he's probably like, man, this is the most boring job I've had in my entire life. Number 6, William NASLUND. He was originally introduced in the comics as the Spirit of 76 in Invaders issue 14. William NASLUND also held Captain America's mantle for a brief moment. This What If comic turned out to be canon, so back after the apparent death of Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes at the end of World War II, the United States approached him to be the new Captain America. The first replacement. Wow, how exciting would that be? So much pressure though. So he had the shield for a brief amount of time. He had done a couple of missions and then he died in action. Yeah, he had to fight off these robots and he ended up in the hands of one of them and was crushed to death. But he went down a hero. He activated a flare device that made the robot inactive, and he also summoned the other members of the All Winners to come to the rescue. So he went out a hero. Short but sweet. Number 5. William Burnside. William Burnside, who had changed his name to Steve Rogers and even got work done on his face to match the look. He ended up developing another Captain America serum, and he and his buddy Jack tried to be the new Bucky and Cap. So they got enhanced abilities and they took down Red Skull. They did some pretty good work as a team. The only thing was, a year later, things started to go a little bit south. They started to become paranoid schizophrenics, so the government put them in cryogenic suspension. He went from being Captain America to being the villain, just like that. So William and his Bucky Barnes sidekick, Jack Monroe, both were in custody of Dr. Faustus, who brainwashed William to become the Grand Director, the leader of the hate group called the National Force.
Number 8. Guilt. One of the worst things to happen to Black Widow, both in the comics and in the MCU, seems to be her own actions. A lot of the time, all of that red in her ledger seems to be one of the biggest things when it comes to her own suffering. In the comics, Black Widow has even set out before on missions to atone for her past misdeeds and sins. But to her, I don't think really any of her actions, no matter how grand or how many of them, will ever really be great enough to let her forgive herself. She seems to struggle with the concepts of self-acceptance and self-forgiveness quite a lot. Perhaps this is what makes her character so relatable for so many of us, but this is also what makes a lot of her life as a hero feel pretty tragic. The fact that she is on what feels like a never-ending journey for atonement. Number 7. Her relationship with Daredevil. I know there are lots of people that ship Black Widow and Daredevil heartily, and based on their stories in more modern comics, I get it. But if we go back into the dark history of their relationship in comics, it gets really weird. The moments from way back when Natasha and Matt were first dating did not age well, and just make Daredevil look like a creep and Black Widow kind of look like his sad doormat. There are actually a lot of things about Daredevil comics that are really, to me, just plain weird. From everyone constantly reminding Matt that he's blind, to his extremely chauvinistic behavior towards Natasha. I also love that Natasha even calls him out for it, but then still goes along with it. Number 6, MCU death. A lot of people have criticized the treatment of Black Widow's character in general in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but one of the worst things was when Black Widow was killed off during Endgame. Black Widow went out nobly, of course, but everyone was left wondering why she had to be so permanently gone. Why was Black Widow the one we lost, huh? What's more, the worst part about this whole endeavor is that while Tony Stark got a big funeral and huge acknowledgement of his sacrifice by the end of the movie, hey, it feels as though Natasha's sacrifice has been all but forgotten at the end of that movie. The most she gets in her memory is angry Hulk throwing a bench and Hawkeye just looking real sad. Nice. Granted, it does seem more likely based on film rumors that it might actually not be the true end for Natasha, as there have been rumors that after her solo film, Scarlett Johansson will actually be making some kind of return as, I don't know, that character or a clone, but at this point it's all still speculative, so I'm still pretty upset about her death. Number 5, relationship with Iron Man. Back to the Ultimate Universe we go! Another awful point when it came to Black Widow's characterization in this alternate universe was that she was paired up with Tony Stark. Well, actually, it isn't even so much that part that I take issue with, but more the fact that she was manipulating him the entire time. Needless to say, this relationship did not end well for either party. As you know, Black Widow ended up being apprehended and later killed, whereas Tony was later reminded of Natasha in a very public way when a certain tape of theirs was circulated publicly. If you haven't already been able to tell, I'm not a huge fan of this part of the Ultimate Universe. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of cool things that came out of that line and came out of that world, but this is definitely not one of them for me. Number 4, manipulated into joining the KGB. After Natasha learned her husband Alexei went missing in action, she was inspired to serve her country by his sacrifice. With Alexei being believed dead, Natasha joined the KGB and became one of their best operatives and spies. In reality, reality, Alexei was not actually dead, but the decision was made to tell Natasha that he was, separating the two after their marriage because, well, the government believed that it was in their best interest to do so when it came to utilizing both of these agents more efficiently. Which is kind of weird because I think they also kind of incentivized them to get married, so I don't know. Number 3, blackmailed into becoming a spy. Not only was Black Widow manipulated into joining the KGB, but even before that, she had actually been blackmailed into becoming a spy for her own country, who threatened her husband's life if she didn't cooperate with them. Yeah, this whole thing's pretty messed up. And that is one of the ways her life as a spy began. And I say one of the ways because, well, Black Widow's life is kind of complicated when it comes to uncovering her true origins. But this, as one of them, is a pretty tragic one. Basically, Natasha's marriage to Alexei, and even in fact, her other marriages, were one of the ways that her country manipulated her and then also controlled her, making her do their bidding. Number 2, retcons on retcons. Speaking of her convoluted origins, Black Widow is a character who has also suffered from retcons on retcons when it comes to her true origin story. Initially, we knew her as a ballerina turned spy. What a strange story. But we would later learn that her ballerina backstory was all a lie, and then in fact all her memories that she had as a ballerina were actually implanted and fake. This was all part of a plot of the Red Room to basically make Natasha believe this was her backstory and like manipulate and control her when she was really being trained by them instead. Not only does this add even more to the number of times and ways in which Natasha was manipulated, blackmailed, and brainwashed, but it also just adds to our confusion when it comes to actually trying to keep track of her backstory and getting it straight. It's like, oh, it was this, but then that was actually all fakes, and it was this, but then that was fake. Number 1, clones. One of the worst things to happen to any character, really. As if it wasn't enough, the Red Room played with Natasha's emotions and manipulated her mind more than once. They also decided to make copies of her and other agents as well. That's right, Natasha also at one point had a ton of clones made in her image. In the end, though, she destroyed the Red Room's clones of her, taking back her own persona and causing a whole lot of grief for the Red Room in the end. Thank goodness. Still, having someone clone you without your permission is pretty awful, and in my book is one of the worst things that can happen to a character. Not anti-clones just as they exist, but I'm anti-cloning, I guess.
Number 9, killed by Captain America. Tony and his tech are pretty close, but in Age of X story, we see the two get a little too close for comfort. After a virus began taking its toll on Tony, he started to literally merge into his armor. That's like something from Black Mirror. That sounds horrible. He decided that a name change was also in order, so he started going by Steel Corpse, which, gotta say, looking at him is much more fitting. He, alongside other much livelier Avengers, headed out to take down some mutants, but upon arrival in superhero fashion, they changed their mind and opted to help everybody else instead. We love a change of heart, nice. Only Tony's advanced suit wasn't exactly on board, so now we have a situation. Tony implored Cap to save them, and at that moment, there was really only one way Cap could do it. R.I.P. Tony. Number 8, punched by Captain Marvel. Avengers Endgame showed Tony being saved by Captain Marvel when he was stuck in deep space. But in Civil War II, they aren't exactly pals. When the inhuman Ulysses Kane starts to divide the superhero community, they get off on the wrong foot. Ulysses has this ability where he can predict possible futures, and in one of those visions he saw catastrophe. Captain Marvel wanted to act on this. We can literally see the future. What a way to have the upper hand, right? But Tony, he wasn't on board. He was concerned about the fact that nobody really knew exactly how Kane's powers were working. That was one thing, but to punish somebody else over something they may do in the future, well, it feels morally wrong. When Spider-Man and Captain America traveled to Washington to seek out a possible vision, conflict does in fact arise. It's Civil War II, you gotta remember that. So Tony gets punched so hard by Captain Marvel that he falls into a coma. Yikes. Number 7, Endgame sacrifice. Of course, the worst things that happened to MCU Tony is also one of the best things that happened to the universe. After 5 years of half the population missing, Tony agrees to work out a time heist with the remaining Avengers, and when they get back with the stones, sans Natasha, Thanos is waiting there too. Tony didn't take the stones and fly away, no, instead he snapped his own fingers and wiped out Thanos and his army. Of course, mirroring the ending of the first Iron Man film, reminding us he is in fact Iron Man. It was a great moment, but I knew Tony was gonna die. But to see him do it in this way felt so fitting. I shed a little drop of sadness in the theater, maybe a few or 5. I couldn't stop crying. Number 6, Paralyzed. Kathleen Dare made her first appearance in Marvel Comics with Iron Man issue 233. She was this fun-loving young woman who fell for Tony Stark, but unfortunately she was psychologically unstable, so that love turned into something more sinister. Later on in Iron Man 242, Kathleen shot Tony and in turn, he was paralyzed. The injury damaged Tony's spine quite a bit. He wasn't even sure if he would ever walk again. Tony Stark is quite dramatic. He likes to put on a show, we know this, and in Iron Man issue 284, he reveals his biggest trick yet. The cover shows Tony Stark laying in a casket with the text underneath reading, "The death of Anthony Stark." Huh, what? Around him are other superheroes. They're mourning the loss of their friend and fellow Avenger. Like in Avengers Endgame, everybody shows up. Even Dr. Doom, he proposes a toast in honor of a worthy opponent who has fallen. But Tony is always prepared, even after death. He had written a note to Rhodey previously, and the note mentions a key card that would give him access to the entire complex in the form of a CD. I got Tony Stark's Secrets and Big Shiny Tune 6. What are we feeling today, folks? Rhodey collects himself, puts in the CD, and clicks play. It's a dream scenario, really. Tony explains to Rhodey that the world still needs Iron Man, and then you see a suit made specifically for Rhodey. What a moment! Again, it mirrors Tony's final holograph message in the MCU, a powerful moment on screen and on page. So Rhodey was stressing. There was so much responsibility bestowed upon him, all the while he's trying to mourn the loss of a close friend. That's a loaded day. So finally, he suits up and it's a blast. Iron Man lives again. Nice. Turns out Tony wasn't actually dead at all, rather just under cryogenic stasis until a scientist sorted out those back problems. Invincible Iron Man, you don't say. Number 5, trick shot to the heart. Dark Avengers issue 190. In the alternate Earth of 13584, we see a pocket reality where Tony has undergone a pretty drastic upgrade, if you want to call it an upgrade, of course. He's still Iron Man, only he's evil this time around, and he's also just a brain. Yeah, this is a dark future where New York is the only remaining part of civilization, so the Dark Avengers are fighting over it. When Janet Van Dyne crushes Iron Man, he ejects out of the suit, again just a brain, just rolls on out, and at that moment Clint's brother, Barty Barton, shoots right through the brain with an arrow. At least there was a quick way to go this time around. Number 4, hit by a plane. Marvel's Dark Ages arc featured a pretty rare injury for Tony to endure, considering that he can fly and he's also wrapped in metal. The timing here is just so unfortunate. The story kicks off with an earthquake. Tony tells Pepper to take cover as he tries to figure out a super solution. Shortly after, there's power cuts, classic earthquake move, so now Pepper is stuck in an elevator and Tony's distress calls aren't even going through to the Avengers. Even his suit powers down mid-flight. On the way down, Tony's flailing about when a passing plane hits him and cuts off his left foot. The plane crashes down on the ground and Tony, while losing quite a bit of blood, crashes into Stark Towers. Number 3, lost the kid. We had an idea of how Infinity War would end. We knew part 2 was a year afterwards, so we knew somebody was biting the dust. Well, half of our beloved heroes ended up turning into dust, including the young Peter Parker. Tom Holland knocked this out of the park. I don't cry in movies often, but when Peter was telling Tony that he didn't want to go, holy this was Tony's final arc, moving to the woods, having a kid, just dropped the superhero life right away, and even when Scott, Steve, and Natasha showed up to offer a possible solution, Tony doesn't even want to be involved. He says he's got a second chance right here, referring to Morgan and Pepper. Losing Spider-Man, Tony felt responsible. He made the kid the suit that allowed him to even go to space in the first place, and then all of a sudden he's a pile of dust all over your lap. Yeah, that would mess me up for 5 years as well. You don't blame him. Number 2, Armor Wars. The Armor Wars series is confirmed to hit Disney Plus sometime down the road, with Don Cheadle attached to the project, so we figured we'd remind you how the comics went. It's just a blast. Armor Wars is a 7-issue series written by David Michelini and Bob Layton. Now after Iron Man's tech was stolen, Tony was on the hunt to take down several villains using any sort of armor or tech. He's taken down anybody with armor. He even fights fellow Avenger Stingray at one point, although he's innocent. I hope we get that fun introduction in live action. That would be crisp. When Iron Man battled Firepower, he got injured so badly that he faked his own death. See, in the comics at this time, the world didn't know that Iron Man was Tony Stark. They thought it was Tony's bodyguard, a guy named Randall Pierce. So Tony ended up becoming the new Iron Man, although he took all of those punches before anonymously. And finally, number 1, Infinity Gauntlet. Just because the Infinity Gauntlet can undo things doesn't mean we can forget about them. Like that time in the comics when Iron Man got his head ripped off by Taraxia. The Infinity Gauntlet was a 6-part series that began in 1991 from the brilliant Jim Starlin and George Perez. It opens with Silver Surfer crashing down into Earth, saying that Thanos is coming. And come issue 4, the Avengers are now going to Thanos. The plan was for the Avengers to attack Thanos and his new partner, Taraxia. Meanwhile, Silver Surfer was waiting around on deck to snatch that Infinity Gauntlet. Sounds easier said than done. Thanos stops Thor's hammers with his fingertips, Wolverine's adamantium bones turn to rubber, so gross. Cyclops gets his head stuck in a clear block of force, Vision gets the life literally ripped out of him, and Iron Man gets dispatched, as Taraxia says, whilst holding Tony's head proudly. Like it's a birthday cake. She's like, here you go, Thanos, here's a head. Things get undone later on, but that one shot of everybody just laying there, it's gonna live in my head rent-free. Number 4, 404. Cap not found. In Captain America issue 404, we see Steve Rogers squaring up against werewolves. Yeah, what a sight to see. You heard me correctly. I said werewolves. The story known as Children of the Night runs from issue 403 to 405. And during this time, Captain America is fighting off Starksboro werewolves, and then when Nightshade tries to inject Wolverine with her wolf serum, his healing factor keeps counteracting him. So Druid mesmerized him with serums too. Then the next issue, we see front and center Cap Wolf. Pretty hard to forget. So now he's a werewolf and he has faint memories of Steve Rogers. So, of course, as you would expect, it's a pretty messy good time. Number 3, Civil War. Captain America Civil War was released in 2016, directed by the Russo brothers, and the whole movie, like the comic, is superhero politics. If you're a superhero, you have to register. You can't just be out filming yourself doing super TikToks and then you end up accidentally exploding a school. It's just not gonna fly anymore. And in the movie, it's Wanda Maximoff who kickstarts the Sokovia Accords, forcing Tony to side with the government as he feels responsible for Charles Spencer, among many others' deaths. You know, with all the events that unfolded with the Age of Ultron stuff. So Steve wants to protect Bucky this whole time, and of course, freedom throughout the team is encouraged. Now, eventually, due to Baron Zemo's work, he gets Tony in the same room as Steve, and we see footage of a brainwashed Bucky kill Tony's parents. The next 10 minutes are filled with Steve having to fight off Tony in order to save his best friend. And it's truly heartbreaking, and it all ends with Steve sticking the shield in Tony's chest, and as he carries away a broken down Winter Soldier, Tony says to him the shield does not belong to him, it belongs to his father. And that's the last time he sees the shield and Tony Stark, so it all goes downhill for Cap for quite a while after this point. Number 2, Stuck in Dimension Z. In the comic storyline Castaway in Dimension Z, Captain America ends up getting stuck in this land created by Arnim Zola, and he's in there for 12 years. That's some Black Mirror type torture. That's like crazy. So during the 12 years, Steve raised a boy named Ian, who's a kid he rescued from Zola as his own. So the whole thing is that Steve has to return to Earth soon before this implant on his torso that's combined with the virus of Zola's consciousness takes over his mind. Not a great scenario. Also, ouch, that doesn't look too comfortable of a procedure. It's one of the more brutal body injuries, and of course the whole being trapped for 12 years element, I mean, that just adds to this already horrible nightmare. And finally, number 1, shot by Sharon Carter. We go back now to the Civil War comic book event where Captain America was killed by his girlfriend Sharon Carter. Yeah, so after Crossbones sniped him, Agent 13, who at the time was Cap's girlfriend, delivered the final bullet from a much closer range. Well, it turns out it wasn't Sharon who was doing the work, really. The classic brainwashing made this defeat happen. Dr. Faustus. Okay, this causes a whole chain of events. I mean, for starters, Bucky decides he should then kill Iron Man after this, blaming him for the death of Steve Rogers. And then also Falcon ends up going after his own lead, he just leaves. And now Tony ended up showing Bucky the letter Cap wrote about how he should be the next Captain America. And Bucky agrees to take the spot only if he can operate solo. No government, no big brother watching, just let me do my job, move out of the way, you guys suck. To think all this came to a climax after Steve's girlfriend was the one to deliver that final blow just adds insult to injury.